All right, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're looking at a situation that is literally rewiring the map of global trade as we know it. We're talking about May 2026, and we are witnessing a massive, escalating logistical disruption unfolding right at the Strait of Hormuz. This is one of the world's absolutely most critical maritime choke points, and it's being physically squeezed by regional conflict and military tensions in the Middle East. And the ripple effects? Well, they're hitting everything from the price of gas at your local pump to the delivery date of your next online order. So let's unpack exactly what's happening here, how the shipping industry is scrambling to respond, and what this all means for the broader global economy. To truly grasp the stakes here, we have to start with this staggering number, 20%. Just think about that for a second. Nearly 20% of all global oil trade passes through this single, incredibly narrow waterway. But, it's not just oil. A massive share of containerized cargo moving into Gulf stations relies entirely on this route too. When a choke point like this gets constricted, it sends an immediate shockwave through the entire global supply chain. You simply cannot replace the sheer volume of traffic overnight.
Section 1. The Hormuz choke point crisis and the current situation.
Now, what's really interesting about these numbers is the violent collapse they represent. If you look at normal traffic, historically, we're talking about 125 to 140 massive commercial ships passing through the strait every single day. But now, that number has violently collapsed down to near single digits. Single digits! Ships aren't just slowing down out there, they are practically vanishing from the strait. Several commercial vessels have reportedly been attacked, delayed, or diverted, which has caused major shipping lines to just outright suspend or heavily reduce their transits through this area. And right behind those collapsing traffic numbers is a very real, very immediate physical and human toll. At the height of this crisis, we are looking at more than 1,500 vessels and over 20,000 seafarers, either directly affected or just completely stranded. I mean, imagine a multi-billion-dollar parking lot of giant cargo ships and oil tankers just sitting out in the ocean, waiting outside the Gulf, completely unable to enter. War risk insurance premiums have absolutely surged, and the maritime industry has essentially hit the pause button on one of its busiest global highways.
Section 2. Rerouting around Africa via the Cape of Good Hope.
So, with the strait heavily compromised, a ton of shipping lines are making the incredibly difficult choice to reroute entirely. They're avoiding both the Red Sea and Hormuz risk zones by sailing all the way down and around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. But as you can guess, this detour comes with some painful, compounding costs. First off, it adds 10 to 14 extra transit days to a journey. And that extra time on the water, that means burning millions of dollars in higher bunker fuel costs. But perhaps the most insidious effect is the severe global equipment shortage it creates. Because ships are taking 2 full weeks longer to complete their loops, the empty shipping containers just aren't getting back to ports in Asia or Europe on time. The entire rhythm of global shipping gets thrown totally out of sync.
Of course, there is still a tiny fraction of ships braving the strait, but believe me, it looks nothing like normal commercial shipping. For the few vessels still making the crossing, they're forced into heavily surveilled, limited controlled transits. We are talking major military escort arrangements, strictly approved routing corridors, and crawling along at reduced convoy-style speeds. Some carriers are even specifically using Iran-designated northern shipping lanes just to try and reduce their risk exposure. It's a highly tense, very slow, and heavily militarized logistical operation just to get a single ship through. Section 3. Multimodal logistics and the massive shift to air freight. Now, for high-value and urgent cargo, waiting an extra 2 weeks on a ship going all the way around Africa simply isn't an option, right? So we're seeing specific industries frantically pivoting to expensive air freight or these hybrid sea-air multimodal solutions using alternative hubs. We've seen massive spikes in air cargo for things like electronics, life-saving pharmaceuticals, just-in-time automotive parts, and high-priority e-commerce. When the ocean stops, the sky literally has to take the weight, even if it costs a major premium.
Section 4. Economic shockwaves and their impact on global logistics.
So, let's zoom out a bit. These cascading economic impacts are hitting us on multiple fronts. First, ocean freight rates are rising rapidly, really mirroring the previous Red Sea crises. We're seeing spiking war risk and emergency operational surcharges. And because the strait handles such massive oil flows, the disruption is putting immense upward pressure on crude oil and diesel costs globally. It's creating an inflationary pressure cooker across almost all industries. And logistically, port congestion is spreading like wildfire. It's not just the Gulf. Ports in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, India, and all the way over to Singapore are getting absolutely slammed with schedule instability as ships arrive way off schedule in massive, unpredictable bunches. So, looking objectively at the data, what does this all mean? Where do we go from here? Well, we basically have two potential paths. If tensions continue, the expected outcomes are pretty stark. Further increases in freight rates, chronic container shortages, severe schedule unreliability, and ultimately, higher consumer prices worldwide due to supply chain inflation. On the flip side, if a diplomatic resolution happens, markets might begin to stabilize. But make no mistake, even with a peace deal signed tomorrow, the massive logistical backlogs are going to take months to clear out. Freight rates will very likely stay elevated for quite some time while the whole system tries to reset itself.
Section 5. Strategies for Future Resilience and Recommended Actions.
Okay, so here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. Global importers and exporters cannot just sit back and wait this out. You have to act. Based on the current crisis data, there are 5 critical actions businesses need to take right now. 1. Diversify your shipping routes immediately. 2. Plan your inventory far earlier than usual to account for those 14-day delays. 3. Build larger transit and inventory buffers into your financial models. 4. Review your force majeure clauses with your carriers today. And 5. Start actively utilizing those multimodal air and sea solutions we talked about earlier. In a crisis like this, agility is literally survival. Which brings us to this incredibly profound strategic observation from the source material. It notes that this situation may permanently reshape maritime trade routes, carrier network strategies, and energy logistics. This is vital to understand, folks. The Strait of Hormuz crisis, especially coming right on the heels of the Red Sea disruptions, is proving that our global supply chains are dangerously vulnerable to geopolitical choke points. Actually, scratch that. It's not just a temporary blip. It is forcing a permanent evolution in how worldwide supply chain risk is managed. And that leaves us with this final, provocative thought. Is the 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis a defining moment for global supply chain resilience? Will we look back at this as the year the world finally stopped relying so heavily on vulnerable, narrow corridors and fundamentally redesigned the architecture of global trade? It's a massive puzzle, and how industries answer it is going to dictate the economy for decades to come. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep your eyes on the data.